my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Dorothy Moss is the curator of painting and sculpture at the National Portrait Gallery. She organized the exhibition Hung Lu Portraits of Promised Lands and edited the accompanying catalog. Jeff Kelly is an art critic and Hung Lu's husband. He met the artist when they were attending graduate school at the University of California, San Diego. Elizabeth Partridge is an award-winning author who lives in Berkeley, California. Her latest book is Parks for the People: How Frederick Law Olmsted Designed America. Enrique Chagoya is a painter, printmaker, and professor at Stanford University. He was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2021 and has worked in several major public collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Smithsonian Institution. Please welcome Dorothy Moss, Jeff Kelly, Elizabeth Partridge, and Enrique Chagoya to PNP Live.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful to the Politics and Prose staff for welcoming us tonight. I'm also grateful to Yale University Press and to the National Portrait Gallery's head of publications, Reese Conlon, for the brilliant work that was put into this exhibition catalog. It was truly a labor of love, and I'm delighted to say that before Hung Lu passed away in August, she read every word of the catalog and the wall text along with Jeff Kelly, and they provided excellent feedback, and the authors were able to go back and forth with the Yale Press editors, editors at the National Portrait Gallery, especially Reese Conlon and Jeff and Hung Lu. So that was a true pleasure. And this happened during the beginning of COVID. So at a time of lockdown and isolation and fear, we had this beautiful circle of writers and researchers and care that went into this publication. I would like to also thank Elizabeth Partridge and Enrique Chagoya for being here. I've always admired your work in writing and art making, and I also deeply admire your friendship with Hung Lu. Both of you had a long and meaningful friendship with the artist, and it was evident to me in the way she talked about both of you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And Jeff, I'm so honored to be sitting next to you here tonight. Jeff is in town in Washington from the Bay Area, and it's wonderful to be able to share the last week of this exhibition with him and to share stories about Hung Lu and to look a little bit deeper and think a little bit further about her work and legacy together. I was lucky to meet Hung Lu back in 2013 when she was a juror for the National Portrait Gallery's triennial Outwin Buchiever Portrait Competition. And I was absolutely captivated by the way she handled the jury process. The process involves being in a warehouse all day long, looking one by one at the artist's entries. And she took great care with each entry, making really incredible comments, thinking hard about the contributions to portraiture that the work would make, and offering a critique of her own to the artist, which I wish the artist had been able to hear, but it was just the jurors in that room. And I fell in love with the way she thought about art and asked her if I could one day visit her studio. So I was lucky enough to be able to visit her studio in Oakland, California soon after that. And talking to Jeff and Hung Lu, I was convinced we had to have an exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery, a retrospective of her portraiture. This is her first major exhibition on the East Coast, and it's the first exhibition by an Asian American woman artist at the National Portrait Gallery. So this is a groundbreaking exhibition, and she was a game changer throughout her life. So she continues to open doors for all of us. The exhibition is located on the second floor of the National Portrait Gallery, and is open through May 29th. So I hope that you will be able to see the exhibition this week if you live nearby. It is a survey of her portraiture, which to me, it felt very powerful at the National Portrait Gallery in the context of a museum of art history and biography, because her work focuses on people who were at risk of being forgotten. She uses historic photographs from China and later from the United States to reimagine and reinvigorate the lives of those who were on the margins of society: refugees, prostitutes, orphans, women soldiers. She makes their lives and stories visible on monumental scale. And in the last week of her life, I was able to visit with her and Jeff and share images on my iPhone of her portraits being brought into the National Portrait Gallery. And images such as these here in the first gallery of her grandmother, of herself as a soldier in China, of her son, Ling Chen Kelly, and of her mother, who you see in the center wall, and her father, who she grew up without knowing because he was removed from her family during the Civil War in China, and she later reunited with him. In the context of the National Portrait Gallery, seeing these paintings brought in on carts, you know, passing by the historic 19th century paintings was breathtaking. It was like a performance art piece in itself. And I was really able to share that with her in her last week. And she had a twinkle in her eye when she thought about that. But here where you see the full collection, public collection of portraits of presidents, you also see people who were unknown and at risk of being forgotten. So let's begin with these photographs, which were, and drawings, which were taken during the Cultural Revolution. And there's a beautiful essay in the book by curator at SF MoMA, Nancy Lim, about the sketches that she made during the Cultural Revolution. But Jeff, I'd love for you to talk about her way of working with the camera during this time period.
Well, she was given a camera to take care of by a man she knew who was being sent off to an army work camp in Inner Mongolia, I think. And he just said, "I'm not supposed to have this, but could you hold on to it for me?" And so she didn't know how to use it, and it was some kind of a German camera. And but she learned how to use it, and then she learned how to develop the film. And it took a while, but she suddenly had a camera, had never used one. Cameras were not very common in China at that time. Prior to that, they were formal situations, like you go to a store and have your photograph taken in a kind of with a photo studio background. But there was nothing candid about photography in any way, or even really journalistic. So she just ended up, and during the Cultural Revolution, which was a 10-year period beginning, I think, in 1966. For the first, well, starting in 1968, for 4 years, she was sent to the countryside to be re-educated with proletarian labor, because she had been to a significant girls' boarding school, same one that Mao Zedong's daughters went to, by the way. I doubt they were sent to the countryside, though. And so she was there for 4 years, and during that time took a lot of photographs, and she was taking pictures of people who probably had never been photographed before, and possibly never were photographed again. And she brought them all to the United States in 1984, but we didn't find them until, I want to say, a dozen years ago. And then she began to print them. We had negatives, and then we had them digitized. And so they're candid shots of old people, children, and I think they're pretty special because hardly any peasants, people that were sent to work in the countryside as peasants had a camera. And I think some of her documentations, almost all of which are from the village that she worked in for those 4 years, are not only are they good photographs, but they, in a way, they foretell what she would later take from Dorothea Lange, who did something similar in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl in this country. So she was taking pictures of people who were quite amazed that they were having their pictures taken. And it took decades and decades for us to come upon these works again. And then very quickly there's drawings. She would do drawings that were from life also. She was a very good artist. And the thing she most enjoyed about drawing her fellow peasants was that every day you were supposed to go and listen to village party chiefs talk about ideology. And during that period, almost everybody decided to draw or write letters or something else. They didn't have to pay attention just as long as they showed up. And so Hung did a lot of drawings of people laying around, pretending to listen to the party elders talk about Mao's thought. Anyway, so that's this wall here.
And that wall, I think, is helpful in setting up her interest in faces and the way that she valued every individual life. There she was laboring in the fields continuously for 4 years. And what she did to renew her strength was make portraits. And so this wall sets up the exhibition. And then the first gallery is devoted to self-portraits and portraits of family members. My essay in the catalog focuses on the importance of family photographs. When she was growing up, her mother took the family to have their family portrait made every year. And these photographs became a record of their family history. During the Cultural Revolution, the Red Guards removed albums from educated people's homes and destroyed photographs and destroyed journals. So Hung Lu and her mother saved a handful of family photographs, and these became some of her most precious possessions. And she would tell me that, we see family photographs as ubiquitous. Now we carry them on our iPhones, but for her, they were rare and even dangerous objects. So I felt it was important to discuss this preciousness and danger in her mind around the photograph, and how that carried into her later work, which is based on historic photographs of Chinese prostitutes and orphans and migrants, as a way of connecting her own story, her own history, and the importance of documenting the journey of lives through photographs.
And if I could just say here,
Yeah.
I want to say that Dorothy's curatorial genius in this respect is that she's the first one ever to think of Hung's work fundamentally in terms of Hung's family. Because there are so many other women and historical figures and kind of vast, tumultuous events that Hung went through and that the photographs that she painted from document. But the central room of the exhibition is a room that, although I've known all the paintings and met probably most of those family members, I would not have conceived it. It's a family album room, and it really does set the stage for the significance of portraiture and the closeness, trying to say, the intimacy of them and everything that's this picture of her and her father. This is the day she was reunited with him 46 years after he had been taken away by the communist soldiers in Changchun, or in I forget the name of the city, but they were under siege. And then she found him when she was 46. And that was the first day they had ever met, that she was a conscious being. That's a hell of a story. And Dorothy put these stories at the center of the exhibition.
Well, I think it's hard to sometimes imagine family photographs as being radical, but she radicalized those photographs and created shaped canvases, which are difficult physically to make. And the subjects become monumental. And I remember in writing the text where I had said she creates monumental portraits of her family members so that we look up to them reverentially. And she crossed that out and said, we look up to them as if they are our own. So she wanted to create that sense of connection. And she often incorporated architectural elements to further add to that sense of these are people coming into our space, sharing a space, they're sharing a psychological space and physical space with us.
Hey, may I say something very quickly about this particular painting? I almost cry when I read about the story about her father, not seeing her father for 46 years. I didn't know that until I read the catalog and her biography. And the fact that her father had no emotions when he first saw her, because during the years of detention, he was forced not to express any feelings. It's, I think, the power of this painting, because you could see a very small emotion on her father, but you could see, even without expressing that much, the deep emotion that Han is showing and how much she loves her father. So it really touches me, this painting. It's really beautiful.
I love that, Enrique, and one of my favorite elements of the painting is the way the linseed drips over her hands onto his body to bind them.
As you say, like tears, it's beautiful. Like, as you say in your in the catalog, in the writing. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Couple of times.
That's me on the right. I guess it's the right. Next to Alan Capro, who was the inventor of happenings and one of the real forerunners of performance art. This is in the 80s. Peter Kirby, who's a filmmaker, and then hung there. And person on the left, I have no idea who that is, but this is in Holland, I think. The point being that Hung studied, she came from China and met Alan Capro. More importantly than even that she met me, but she met Alan Capro. And he's probably the most significant. He changed her work just by introducing the dimension of experimentalism into the art making process, that in America, art could be anything you wanted it to be, but you also had to take personal responsibility for what you decided it was. And you had to hold and defend that responsibility for your whole career. And so, yeah, this is us back then. So we met at UC San Diego, which had Alan Capro, the feminist historian Moira Roth, David and Eleanor Anton, Manny Farber, and so many other people whose work had a political dimension to it and was very much a matter of experimenting with with every kind of medium that could be found. Anyway, I'm done talking about that picture. Oh, no.
And her work became more conceptual during that period and more experimental. And this, as those who know her work know, is one of her most iconic and most reproduced works, Resident Alien. And Enrique, I love hearing you talk about this painting.
Yes, I love you. I mean, I love it. I'm sorry, I love
you too, Enrique.
I love you too, Enrique.
No, I love you to ask me for this. The thing is, this is an amazing painting. I mean, all all of us who have immigrated to this country and became citizens, before we become citizens, we get one of these cards. And the striking thing is the word alien, like you are from another planet. And it's a really weird thing to feel, especially because you are having the experience of immigration. And Han and I, like with other friends who have come to this country, we exchange a lot of our experiences of moving from one place to another. And what I realized is that immigration is not a change of passport. It's not a change of legal status. It's an inner change, because suddenly we get distant, have a distance from our memories, and photography lost for Hang Liu. I want to talk more about her than me. The photography lost from her family during the Cultural Revolution. Most of it was destroyed. It's in a way a painful reminder that, in a way, we are memories ourselves. Without memories, we are not ourselves. I mean, you could get ill at some point and lose your memory, and you stop being yourself. Somehow, memories in Hang's experience, in her own life, when she talks about the ghosts of her past, are herself. And as immigrants, we all become what we love. That we become the places we live into. I have lived in many different places, so I become a lot of the places I have lived before, because I like them, because there's something I really love about them. And the same thing with the cultures you embrace. They are different than your own, but then you become part of those new cultures. So eventually, and this is something Han and I agree, it was eventually you feel like you are from nowhere and from everywhere. You become like a citizen of a borderless country. It takes many years before you land from one place to another. Even if you change passports, you still might not be landed totally in the new place. But eventually you become something else, somebody else, but still you are attached to all this experience and memories. And if anything, it makes me also realize this exhibition of at the National Gallery made me discover a new side of Hang Liu that I didn't know. We were friends. We mostly got together with Jeff and Hang in Hang's studio with many friends that were visiting. I used to have my studio a few blocks from her at the Vulcan Foundry Studios in Oakland, and we have one of our favorite restaurants, a Thai restaurant. We all went from her studio after having cocktails to the restaurant. We became that new memory. That's like a new world of affections that expanded the life of Hang Liu and mine and many other friends, and expanded the life of even people who knew her here, like Jeff and other American friends, and all of us who became American as well. So this becomes like an expanded American experience for everybody. So this exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery, for me, is an expanded view about how context affects art, like her landscape paintings that, they're just like, if you see them for the first time and they just look like a small impressionist little paintings, they are harmless, but they were subversive in the context where she was studying in the teacher's school, in the propaganda entertainment teachers school, where she was forced to paint socialist realist paintings, which were not socialist, neither realist, but those little paintings, she had to hide them away from her roommate, who was an informant. So even a little landscape could be subversive for someone like Hang Liu. And that is a lesson for me, at least, because I realized context makes also the art. Whether we have a lot of freedom here or not, because things are changing, but the freedom we have to paint, at least at this moment, to paint things that we get away with and we still like, it's a luxury. And Han and this exhibition at least in my case, it makes me appreciate all of these elements, the power of memory, who we are with memory, the power of context in where artists produce art, and especially in the case of Hung Liu, who, in my opinion, is a true revolutionary. And she dedicated a print for me to say, for a different cultural revolution in America and beyond. That's like what she wrote, in the 2000s. And it's the opposite of the cultural revolution that she experienced. So for me, that was, something I really, really feel identified with. In Mexico, we read the Little Red Book. We didn't know anything of what was happening with the Cultural Revolution. We thought it was just very radical. But thanks to personal connection and friendship, like people like Hung Liu, the perspective gets more complex. Nothing is black or white in the world. So I have a lot to say, and I better stop here. But I just have to say how much I appreciate this exhibition and how much personally I miss Hung, because I really, really appreciate it in many, many ways, not only as a friend, but such an amazing intellectual as well. Thank you.
You tapped into something that I love about her, the revolution and this subversive nature of both her small work and her monumental work, and how scale plays into the subversive aspect of her work. But I think she made those of us around her, including her students who adored her, feel we were all part of a revolution to make people see each other. It was something that was that basic, but that subversive in this current world. And it's something she always fought for.
Go back one just for a sec. Enrique, your idea that this resident alien painting and the card that it's based on, which of course is a government mugshot, typically we think of it as a limitation of identity. That this is the one thing that you are allowed to be in this country until you are a citizen. Your idea that it really creates an expanded sense of what an American is, I've never thought of that before, and it's so true, because that painting changed my sense as an Irish white guy from Pennsylvania, actually born right here in Washington, D.C. It changed my sense of what being an American is too. And I would also add that sometimes artists make their first painting and it becomes their most famous painting. This, in a sense, was Hung's first real painting, and it certainly is her most famous one.
Elizabeth, I would love to hear your thoughts on, I know you'll be talking more about her Dorothea Lange series based on the work that you wrote about for the catalog, but I'm also interested to hear you talk about her approach to painting women. And here's a portrait of her grandmother. And she often told me that she drew her strength not from an American feminism, but from a Chinese feminism, from the strength of her grandmother and her mother, and reading the Ballad of Mulan on her grandfather's lap, and the way that her family nurtured her intellect and her, what we all know was her fierce sense of self and determination. Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, my dog was barking earlier. Yes, I love this because in terms of it being a statement about the strength of women, if you just look at her grandmother's hands, as you've shown there, it's so, those hands are so strong and have done so much work in their lives, and also this face of just like, you're not going to knock me over. I will persevere. And you can totally feel the wind at Hung's back as she went through her life with a mother and a grandmother like this. Why don't you go ahead to your next wonderful slide, Dorothy?
And these end up, that sense of strength, she then transfers into the portraits that she made based on historic photographs of Chinese women who were being objectified by the camera.
Yeah, which I think is just, it's part of this thing where she refuses to let hidden stories stay hidden. She wants to bring them to light. And, you know, if you think about her losing her father at 1 year old by him being removed from the family by the communist forces, you think about how that must have permeated her through her life to understand that she basically was relying pretty much on a matriarchy to set her up to go out into her life. And she did it with a very keen awareness of how stacked the deck was against women, you know, to the point of this beautiful and horrible photo on the right of bound feet like this, where you see the difference between a graceful woman's sexual encounter with her bound feet and a broom that a woman with bound feet would not be able to use. It's just a very powerful statement about the position women were put into. Those being, of course, the upper class women who had their feet bound.
Exactly. And of course, she was also reflecting on current events while she made paintings using historic photographs. This one was made in 1989.
Well, this was in response to the violence of Tiananmen Square, and you have, you know, a juxtaposition of a photograph of an upper class woman whose bound feet are bared in front of the camera in 1900, which was an almost unthinkable thing to do, almost pornographic. And then you have a vessel, a porcelain vessel, which is in a collection in Paris in a museum, showing a lovemaking scene of a man and a woman also having a little, you can see one of her two bound feet. And so there's a kind of fragility to each of them as vessels, little bowls beneath each, suggesting that the color came out of those little common wooden bowls to make the paintings. And then on the right, there's a little blackboard of the kind that you would practice Chinese characters over and over again, but there's nothing on it. So in a sense, the woman's identity, her face, has been erased. All of the women all the way across. The broom is part of, you know, the ancient character for woman always had two elements. One of them was a kneeling figure and the other was a broom. So that shows you the kind of status of women throughout written Chinese language. But the broom was also something that people understood to have been used to kind of clean blood off of Tiananmen Square, you know, after the violence there. So it's a very complicated piece in which, in every respect, the identity of the women as shaped objects has been erased and pushed down.
Again, her project to elevate women who were being pushed down and objectified by turning them into these untouchable, almost holy figures, including this painting, which is beautiful, that incorporates gold leaf and an architectural element. The face is slightly blurred to give a sense of distance. And what I see here is, and this is based on a photograph of a prostitute that would have been sold to a client, of a woman posed in a photograph studio. But here, Hung Lu has imbued this portrait and this woman with dignity, and she's protecting her with her materials. And then Hung was very interested in subverting the idea of propagandistic images. And this is a series called Where is Mao, where if you could see up close, she has erased the facial figures of Mao. She called this an anti-monument. All of these images are based on photographs of Mao with world leaders and engaged in propagandistic events that circulated in the mass press. And then again, her interest in children. This is a group of orphan girls in a missionary, an Episcopal missionary school in modern day Wuhan. She was so moved by the faces, the sadness, the loneliness, the worry on these faces, that she paid tribute to them and gave them new life with these beautiful, whimsical individual portraits or small group portraits, where she incorporates the circle, which was a symbol that she used throughout her career, which, Jeff, would you like to talk about that?
Let's go to the next picture though.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to quickly say is that she took that group photograph, like a class photo, and she did all these paintings of either individual or duet or triplets or quadruplets of these girls. And she did something that she can do with oil painting that the camera wasn't able to do, and that is pull these portraits into the world of color and into the world of a kind of a mineral physicality, and she gave them just the kind of personality that they actually don't have in the black and white historical photograph. She did this constantly because, she became known, I think, for allowing the women who, had been treated so badly in history she allowed the women in these historical photographs to kind of seize the dignity required to look back at the camera and, in a sense, to look into the future at whoever was looking from the other side of Hung's painting. So she took black and white historical, gritty, often unfocused photographs, and she turned them into drippy, wet, fluid, thick, very minerally rich paintings on canvas. As part of the visual and physical language of the way she painted, she invented two things really that seem very simple. One is a drip, and the other is a circle. And what I think they are, there are a lot of things, but what I think they fundamentally are is kind of postured together in a tension in which the drips are what gravity does, and the circle is an attempt to make a form that holds itself against that force of gravity. So the circles will drip, and the whole painting might drip away sometime. She would come back the next morning and much of the piece would be gone. But then sometimes the circle would hold its place. And so there was this dialectical play between holding ground and giving ground. There's a lot of other ways to interpret them, as maybe a Buddhist sign, and the whole idea of a kind of weeping realism. But the idea that a circle will hold itself like a kind of a stamp on an ancient Chinese painting, and the drip will try to take the image and return it back into the dissolution of memory, history, as Enrique was talking about, that our memories of ourselves change too. And so everything about us dissolves in time. And I think that these paintings in many ways were embodied that.
Also, may I add something else to this kind of work? It's that they also, if you think about it, it's the opposite of propagandistic art, the opposite of the socialist realism that she was in a way escaping away from when she was studying in the teachers' academy. And this is very, in a way, I don't, for lack of better words, it's very poetic, very imaginative. It's a way to really have like a very healing memory of something very painful in her own experience, basically. So these elements of nature and like the flower, the lotus looks like, and that stork and all these birds that I don't know, they might translate into the viewer as just different symbols of freedom, maybe the Buddhists as symbols of some deeper spirituality that, how can I put it? It's surrounding these figures that clearly are having a really difficult time in their lives.
They're offerings. This is what Hung always did.
Right.
She gave offerings to her subjects. Some critics have interpreted these as unnecessary or gratuitous decoration baloney. These are offerings like the Buddhas or you know, the drip, it just brings alive the face. And also the politics of the work is embedded in these drips too, because as you said, with socialist realism, you were not supposed to have, you know, it had to be like Jacques-Louis David. You weren't supposed to do anything that would in any way badly represent the great leader or whoever the great leaders were, or the great heroes, or the great farmers, or the great workers. So Hung was constantly critiquing the rigid technique in which she had been trained. And at the same time, allowing the subject matter to dissolve back into history, and to kind of make contact with the past at the moment it makes contact with the viewer in the present.
But she also sometimes employed the drip as a weapon. In the case of the Korean comfort women, she's using the drip to erase the Japanese soldiers who were standing behind them in the original photograph. So the drip, I think, had different, employed it for different reasons at different times, and to great effect. And I love the idea of this disillusion, but also creation that happens, and a recreation of the source material. Elizabeth, I would love to move into her final series based on Dorothy Lang's archive. And I know that Hung always felt a kinship with Dorothy Lang because of her own experience during the Cultural Revolution, where she was forced to labor and encountered the laborers around her and wanted to know their story and portrayed them. So she really, in her mind, there wasn't that great a distance between the Chinese source photographs and the Dorothy Lang archive.
Yeah, I agree that there was something about Hung's displacement and loss of her dad that set her up for some just amazing themes that are very similar to Dorothea Lang's themes. Dorothea's father walked out on the family unexpectedly, and Dorothea also had a pretty significant limp from polio that she contracted when she was 7, which always made her kind of an outsider and an observer. And both Hung and Dorothea were really drawn to these, to women, to hungry babies, hungry children, hungry people, and just displacement and dislocation is such a big theme for both of them. They're just always prevalent in both of their work. So I can completely see how Hung was like, oh, wow, look at this bridge here between China and the United States. I mean, it was just so many parallels there for her to follow along. And one of the things she does, I love, that shows up, if you go back one image, thanks. This is a Mexican woman and her baby, I believe in California. It's from a photograph Dorothea took. And Hung didn't just leave it. what she did is give them this beautiful golden disc. It's like there's a way that Hung's work for me is so, it's like she's working in a parallel universe where she's going, not only putting like almost a beneficence on the subject she's painting, but she's going back and saying to them, I give you light, I give you food, I give you some status. You know, she's always finding a gift to take back to the ancestors. So it's both a present day reckoning, like let's look, really look, and also a lovely way of like being out of time and doing some amazing work.
Dorothy, I want to say we have about 10 minutes left for audience questions.
Okay, thank you. So let me pull up the audience questions. I have a question here. How did Hung Lu grapple with the politics of the Chinese government and how she saw contemporary conflicts? Was this reflected in her work?
Well, I mean, Hung left China in 1984, and she took 4 years to get a passport. The Chinese didn't want to let her go. When they finally gave her a passport, she got an American visa in about 15 minutes. It's kind of the reverse now. But, you know, the sense of politics in China, well, you know, I mean, she hated it. You know, she wanted to be a better artist. She knew that she could be a better artist somewhere else. She imagined that that would be in the United States, and she took the risk of trying to get into, well, what was in fact a great university art department with some of the most experimental faculty that existed at the time in the country. You know, it was kind of magical. And at that point, she realized that the politics of being a contemporary artist in America was partly what you did with the work you made. It wasn't just about the subject matter. It was also how you made the object, and that she had to learn to make new kinds of work, but work that was profoundly based in China. And in her experience, that's why almost all of her work is based on historical black and white photographs, which leaves one point that we never discuss: her color. She's one of the great colorists. That's because it's all in her head. None of it comes from the photographs. All of it comes from what she sort of remembers and what she decides to live with as a painter. The color someday will be seen as one of the great contributions that she made to the work. And the life that it brings to the work is the opposite of the deadness that a dead politics will allow you to paint.
And this is a related question. Did Hung Lu consider herself a political dissident artist? How did she relate to Ai Weiwei and other Chinese political dissidents?
She knew Ai Weiwei when he was a kid in the late 70s in the Dunhuan caves out in the Gobi Desert. She introduced me to him in 1987 in New York during his famous formative years when he was meeting people like Allen Ginsberg and so forth. She's a lot older than Ai Weiwei, like a dozen years. And he wasn't even known to anybody at the time when he came to the US in 1981. And she came to the US in 1984. She, I believe, was the first Chinese artist who came here to go to graduate school, even though she already had been to graduate school in China. Weiwei came here to get out of China because his father also, or not also, his father was a very famous poet who had been, treated very harshly by the Chinese. Hung just wanted it to be as free as she could be, and she was willing to take responsibility for it. But she knew, and we still know, Ai Weiwei, and it was a complicated relationship.
Another question that has come through is about whether Hung Lu continued to photograph, or did she primarily paint?
She primarily did not photograph, no. She almost entirely found old photographs, archival photographs, stuff from old magazines, stuff she brought from China, and stuff she found here. So she was a research, the photographs were archival and research materials. I mean, in a way, that's how she found Dorothea Lange's photographs, by watching first years ago, The Grapes of Wrath. And then I took her one time to the Arvin camp, where a lot of the Dust Bowl people came and tried to live in a decent government camp. And at that moment, she became overwhelmed with it. And so she started painting what I've called the American peasantry, because she had already painted lots of the Chinese peasantry.
Well, I know we are running out of time, and I would just like to have the panelists have the final word. So anything that has not yet been said, Elizabeth, please, and Enrique.
Yes.
Thank you, Enrique. I would love to read the two quotes that I put at the beginning of my essay, because I just think it sums up Dorothea Lange and then Hung so beautifully. Dorothea said, "The good photograph is not the object. The consequences of the photo are the object, so that no one would say, 'How did you do it? Where did you find it?' But they would say that such things could be." And then Hung, "I paint from historical photographs of people. The majority of them had no name, no bio, no story left, nothing. I feel they are kind of lost souls, spirit ghosts. My painting is a memorial site for them."
I would just say that the more we learn about Hung Liu, the more she, in a way, affects the way we see the world. She changes us when we see her work. So that's something that will remain with us. That will be the last thing I would like to say. I thank you for having this chance to share these experiences with everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, I could just say the dumbest possible thing, and that is I miss her.
Yeah, well, all of us.
We all do. And I have to say, living with these paintings, I've been honored to work with her and Jeff, and to be able to live with these paintings now since August. And I see something new every day. She continues to speak. Her power as a painter grows ever more urgent. And so she's outliving us. I mean, she's really here with us in her work. And I look forward to the ways that young scholars will continue to dig into the rich, subversive, and meaningful content that she has created, and to the many exhibitions and publications ahead. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Politics and Prose Bookstore for hosting us tonight, and for carrying the book in your wonderful bookstore.
And thank you, Dorothy and Jeff, Enrique, and Elizabeth, for giving such a wonderful conversation tonight. And also thank you to everyone that came out to virtually be here with us. Your patronage is what enables us to bring you programming like this, and we cannot continue to host these type of events without the book sales to support them. So please support our panelists and PNP by using the link in the chat to purchase Hung Lu Portraits of Promised Lands. And check our website for the most updated event listings, as we have a great list to choose from. We are also doing in-person events now, as well as virtual, so they're all on the website. We do hope to see you there, and thank you for joining us today. Stay well read, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Everyone. Have a beautiful